You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name's Trent Fleskins, your host. As always, this week we are going back to the suburbs as I promised late last year. We're getting to the grassroots and we're going to start with one of my favourite poster boy gentrification suburbs over the last few years. I can't think of a suburb in Western Australia that has tracked this path in terms of price growth since COVID. It is Willagee, as per the name of the episode, and there is only one person we can speak to when it comes to the Willagee property market. It is Willagee's number one sales agent for as long as I've been alive. It is Siobhan Micale from Yard Property. How are you going, Siobhan?
Thanks, Trent. What a nice introduction.
Well, it was a sort of silver tongue, I think, there. How are you going?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm really good.
It seems like it has been a very busy last 3 or 4 years, especially for you. Obviously, transacting in Willagee has been quite the roller coaster over the last decade, and you've been the number one in Willagee for a very long time. But specifically the last 3 or 4 years, surely you wouldn't even have believed the prices you're getting now.
I'm a big fan of Willagee and always have been for the last, this will be my 15th year selling in Willagee. So
when you think about prices only 3 or 4 years ago, there really isn't a suburb in Western Australia other than maybe your bottom 10 suburbs that are coming from those $200,000 price points that have grown this significantly. We're talking about properties that most of which development blocks, units, freestanding houses on full blocks, on half blocks, everything in Willagee was selling for around the $500,000 mark only 3-4 years ago. Now, we're breaking records every week at the moment and getting into 7 figures sometimes. It is an absolute stratospheric change.
Absolutely.
And it can only be characterized by that word, gentrification. Have you seen a big change, a big shift in the demographic of people coming in over the last few years?
absolutely. Over the last 4 to 5 years, it's been massive in terms of the type of buyer that wants to move into Willagee. But it doesn't surprise me. It's surrounded by well-established, really strong performing suburbs like Melville, Palmyra, Cardinia, Winthrop. We would only expect that it was ever going to go up in terms of price.
Well, you make a really good point there. It's that ripple effect. When you've got a suburb that historically has struggled in the price points because of its state housing background decades ago.
That's right.
And then you have that surrounded by suburbs like that. You know, we've got Melville, Winthrop. These are blue chip suburbs that have been in the $1 million mark for a little while now. You can't have suburbs adjacent to each other with such massive median house price differences.
Yes.
It really was only going to come up one way, wasn't it? Because the Winthrops, the Melvilles, they are really hitting some peaky price points that a lot of people that historically have lived there just can't afford anymore.
That's where Willagee has come in as a big performer. We've often got the riverside suburbs, Melville, Palmyra. They've just been outpriced in those areas. You know, if you're looking in the millions, I sold 3 properties over $1 million just in December, and the amount of buyers that were attracted to Willagee due to the infrastructure as well, that's a big thing that's changed. Sadler's estate coming in, it really did change things as far as Willagee went during COVID. You've also got along the Archibald Street precinct, you've got Crescentry that's just come in, there's multiple cafes, you've got pizzerias, you've now got restaurants, you've got that infrastructure in terms of medical, podiatry, chiropractors. So everything you need is within Willagee. You don't really have to go outside of Willagee very often to find the services that someone needs.
Do you think it has definitively broken the shackles of its past? When you think about other suburbs that had that, it's a fact, it had that estate housing history. But it just feels like whilst there are still properties that are owned by the State Housing Commission, like most suburbs in Perth, it really feels like it's just pushed out of that now, and it's become really a family suburb that has that range of young people, older people. People come there for the primary school these days. It feels like no one's talking about that anymore other than me, obviously, because we have to look back to look forward, I think, in property. It doesn't feel like another suburb, for example. You think about Coolbellup, which has also performed extremely well over the last few years, but I still think there's a bit of a stigma with Coolbellup. I don't think Willagee has that stigma anymore.
Yes, absolutely. Whether it be a young couple coming into Willagee or older couples coming in previous times, I suppose the surrounding suburbs, when older people looking to downsize would bypass Willagee, they're now looking, Siobhan, we need something, so we need to get into the area, we're really keen. So they know that the infrastructure is there and that's what's attracting them. And also the prices, we're no longer looking at a first home buyer, they can't afford anything really under $700,000 unless they go with the older villas that we've got on Winnicott Street. You just can't find anything in a lower price point in the area, which is fantastic.
Let's talk to those stats. When we think about looking at performance, the first thing most of us do will be, let's go on REWA and look at sales growth evidence for the year or median house price growth. And the thing that's strange to me, and this is where I struggle with data sometimes, because I see the house-by-house data every day that comes in, and I track Willagee quite specifically because we've got a number of projects that have run through there. REWA is reporting a year-on-year sales growth of 3.8% for Willagee. Now, I fall off my chair when I see that, because the reality that I'm seeing is more like 20%.
It's higher. That's right.
And the only way that I can reconcile that is that with the advent of the rezoning of Willagee, there's a number of smaller units that have come in on the market, which is skewing the subset of properties in Willagee that are being sold. Do you have any other explanation as to how that anomaly is coming through?
So one of the things that I've thought about is that when families have moved into Willagee, they're no longer wanting to use it as a stepping stone to get into Melville or Palmyra or even over to Bigden. What they're wanting to do is upsize in the area, or they're just remaining in the suburb because they love the school, they love the community, they've got everything they need there. So they just don't want to move anymore. So you'll find that the first home buyers may be coming into small apartments or a 2-by-1 unit, they'll move on. But I really feel like I'm struggling to get listings in the area of $700,000 or plus. Families are happy to remain in the area, put up with their properties that maybe they first purchased in Willagee a few years ago, due to the fact that there's such a low amount of listings on the market at the moment, something like 3,800 listings available. There's nowhere for them to go.
It is interesting to note there really isn't much available on the market at all. And I think that's a good point that you make. It really sits across most of Western Australia, to be frank, that same theme, that there are a number of people, I think, who will be ready to move, who will be ready to upgrade, downsize, but they just have nowhere to go. And in the case of Willagee, they're comfortable there in the first place unless something compelling is moving them along. It's not a situation where people are coming to you saying, I'm ready to go, I'll figure it out later. I assume a lot of your job, which I've also broached with a couple of other agents recently on this podcast, is you're acting not only as a selling agent, but often as a buyer's agent, just to find somewhere to live for the people you're trying to list for.
So you've got to become really creative in terms of finding that property for your seller to upgrade to within the area or out of the suburb. Otherwise, they're just sitting tight, waiting for the market to change and more listings to come into the market, I suppose. We've never seen so many subject to sale buyers as we are seeing at the moment.
But they're not winning the properties, are they? Subject to sale is a really tough one in the market as hot as this to convince a seller, let alone a seller's agent, to actually accept, right? There's enough people out there going cash or 21 days finance.
Absolutely. And what I'm seeing also in the market right now is that buyers, even from 6 months ago, buyers are pre-approved, ready to go, hot to trot. They're just ready to get into the race, I suppose.
They're much more organised, aren't they?
Very much so.
Because they have to be. This is a cool stat to note. There are 6 properties on the market right now, you'd know this, in a suburb of nearly 5,000 people. I mean, that's just ridiculous when you think about it. And rental growth has gone up 20% this year. Now, that's what makes sense to me, and that I've seen that across the course of it. What I want to talk to you about, and this is why we've got you in, is you are the source of anecdotes. We love to hear stats, but what I really think people love to hear is stories. So you've got a few properties that you can talk about to us today that you've sold recently, that I know you've also sold in the past, or that have sold in the last few years, that people can really start to recognize, connect the dots to go, holy shit, like this is some serious growth going on in this suburb. I never thought to look here. I'll start off the bat with a few of our developments that you've sold over the last few months. I remember we purchased a number of triplex sites, Arkwell Street, a couple on there that you've sold recently for us. We purchased those blocks in the 500,000s at the time, and we were doing our feasibilities that these units, once we finished building them, would sell for mid 500s if we were lucky at the time. This was 2020. I thought we were being pretty spot on there. We weren't being too aggressive, too conservative. Tell us some stories about what you've sold for us on Arkwell Street in the last couple of months.
Yes, so I believe that your clients purchased one down at 120 Arkwell Street for around the $600,000 mark.
Yep.
Parkside location. That end of Arkwell Street hasn't had a full regentrification. It's been a little bit slower. You've got a lot of older clientele who are holding on to their large blocks, but a fantastic location there opposite Weber Reserve. It's down near the end where, it's close walking distance to Woolworths as well. So I brought those out in late November. The street front one has sold for $850,000.
I could sit here and say I'm a genius, right? But there's no way that I could have expected that a 3x2 across the road from a park in Willagee would be selling for $850,000. I'm a massive bull on this market. I look at the market every day. But I'm falling off my seat. Every time that you bring me an opportunity to buy, I say there's no way that the market's going to pay that. That's ridiculous. You've been getting that price. I'd like to say that you're a fantastic agent, which you are, but it still absolutely has been surprising me, the performance of this suburb, more than any other suburb in Western Australia. You don't just sell in Willagee, you're selling Coolblup, Cardinia, Samson. What's happening in Willagee? What is the secret sauce here? Yes, every suburb in Perth has been growing. We've seen 20-25% across most of Perth. But I'm seeing more like 50-60% across Willagee in the last 4 years. What's happening?
I think in terms of developers, they really come into the suburb, they listen to what the buyers are looking for, and I think that's a key to the change in the suburb. Rather than bringing these cookie cutter little 3x2s that are going to sell, they're putting more money into them. They're putting high specs on them, really strong features, really thinking about how they're going to make this product appeal to the buyer. We can't say enough about the suburb, what the suburb offers, but in terms of what product we're actually bringing to the market, it's different than most suburbs, I believe. And the developers are really getting on board with that.
That's the point, right? When you're gentrifying, you don't want it to turn out like another Balga. And Balga, for everyone listening, northern suburbs, about 13 k's north of Perth, that suburb was blanket rezoned 25 years ago to R40, and it is just low quality cookie cutter triplexes throughout the whole suburb. Really not a lot of increase in amenity. A lowest common denominator policy really that's run through there in a low socio-economic area. The same thing could have happened to Willagee. It really could. I mean, there is no real control that the local government has over the quality of the build. They can control the design, but the quality doesn't always come out the way you want it to. So it is a good point to note here that when everyone comes in, either whether it's through a renovation, and we'll talk about those next because you've seen a few of those, but also through the infill that's happening in Willagee, it is actually seeming to bring up the quality level, this minimum standard of product in Willagee, which originally was just old 50s and 60s state government homes, really.
You talk about the City of Melville or the local council. I think the City of Melville had an idea of what they wanted Willagee to become, and I feel that they were on the right page. They understood the suburb and keeping in with the 50s and 60s feel, bringing in the newest type of product. I think we've been able to spread a good amount of product across Willagee that appeals to not only first home buyers but downsizers as well.
Let's talk about a development block that recently sold in Willagee. It's on Chiltern Street, R25 zoning, 810 square metre block, so it's a duplex block. Most of the time in Willagee you would see this turn into a house behind a house land subdivision. I'm sure you would agree 4 years ago that property would have sold in the 500,000.
That's right.
What did it just sell for?
Chiltern Street just sold for $870,000.
This is a perfect example where, again, the underlying value of this property, the highest and best use is that subdivision, is retaining the house, doing a small renovation on it, I guess, and then selling the land at the back. $870,000 isn't achieved unless the underlying value of that front house when renovated and the land at the back can support that. People just won't pay for it unless it's an owner-occupier. And clearly we're seeing some real value growth there.
I mean, you see in particular along Chiltern Street, there are a few along that street that have been knocked over and they've built double-storey side-by-sides. you're in a really nice pocket there. And I think that the buyers looking in there can see that what's been presented, what products have been built, it's a nice little pocket.
Well, that's a good alternative as well, right? As you said, there are side-by-side properties, 2 stories that have been built there. It's really lifted the value of that street up from what it used to be.
Correct.
And that is the other alternative. If you did the numbers again, you could also support doing a side-by-side land development too. So clearly the numbers have been done. I wouldn't have paid that. I was in at a lower price than the 800s when I looked at it myself. But clearly the market is supporting these numbers.
Well, we had 8 offers, Trent, on that property.
That starts to give you a bit of confidence that there is quite a depth in the buyer pool in Willagee. And as you said before, the issue is probably not the amount of buyers, but just the amount of sellers, which would be the only thing holding back more records coming along.
Well, when you look at Denian Street last year, an agent sold on a triplex block, street front, went for 1.135 million for a just over 200 square metre block. It was a 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom. So the numbers stack up.
The price points are there, as you said. Another one that's sold a couple of months ago, it wasn't from yourself, but was from an out-of-suburb agent. You got a listing there, 7 Wayland Street. And this one's blowing me off my chair a little bit. 8th of August 2020, the owner bought that property for $435,000. It's a 3x1 on 440 squares, right? That property sold, as you would know, for $750,000 late last year. That is a 72% increase in price in 3 years. It's very hard to correlate these numbers, but you're not surprised by this.
It doesn't happen all the time.
It doesn't happen all the time, but
No.
these prices are being achieved, right? 750, this is not an anomaly. You're seeing
No.
like most things in Willagee are going for numbers up to $1 million, if not more now, right?
That's right. I've just sold one on Worley Street opposite Winnicott Oval. It was a street front, 1950s home. A local resident purchased it, went over 800,000. Lifestyle of having their home opposite a park, and it was a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom, double brick home.
Let's juxtapose this across a couple of the other suburbs that you do sell in quite a bit. We
Yes.
mentioned Coolbellup before.
Yes.
For everyone listening, Coolbellup, a step down in the socioeconomics and demographics. I'd say that Willagee's pushed itself from the 3rd quartile into the 2nd quartile over the last couple of years. Coolbellup's probably gone from the 4th, tipping into the 3rd now in terms of price point and demographics. It's supported a lot by the hospital. You know, a lot of doctors and nurses
that's
starting
right.
to move into Coolbellup these days, but also just the price point of the suburbs around it. Hamilton Hill, Hilton, Beaconsfield, these suburbs have just rocketed as well. So naturally, Coolbellup comes up. Prices dropped to as low as $360,000 for full development blocks in Coolbellup 4 years ago. I mean, that is as low as it went. They're going in the 600s now, aren't they?
700s.
Jeez, that's new to me.
And the other thing is that I think that with Willagee being outpriced with most first home buyers, some of the developers, they're just moving across to Coolbellup. They've seen what Willagee's been able to achieve over the last few years. They're hoping that Coolbellup's going to be the next it suburb, which it is.
Why
it's
is
exciting at the moment.
What's happening in Coolbellup? Is it simply the case that we have similar dynamics there? You've got subdivision potential, so people can come in and gentrify things. There's a number of parks.
right.
It's quite a green suburb, Coolbellup. What else is supporting that price rise? Because to be frank, when you look across the river and you go to places like Balga, Girraween, Westminster, yes, we're seeing price growth there. These are analogous suburbs. They are the equivalent north of the river. But we've seen nothing like the price growth of Coolbellup and Willagee in these suburbs. What's the difference? I'm really trying to grasp it myself as to how this is being released. It has to be that there is a shift in demographics that can afford this.
Absolutely, but I also think it's about opportunity. So both of these suburbs of Willagee and Coolbellup, with the rezoning, there's an opportunity for mum and dad developers to come in and do a development. That, you know, Coolbellup has R30s, R60s available, and it's just made a big difference to the suburb in terms of they can often see that they can make some money out of purchasing a block essentially for around between that $500,000 and $600,000 range, and to be able to put 3 new properties on it. I don't know if I've told you, but I recently sold a triplex in Coolbellup on Archidamus and Aegis, and I sold 2 under construction for $675,000 and $690,000 for 3x2s, and I've just sold around October a 3x2, so it was the final one to go for $713,000. multiple offers.
You were doing well if you were getting in the low 400s.
Well, I think the first time I came into Coolbellup and started selling villas, it was a 16, 18-month-old villa that on the other side, closer to Seton College, we got $525 for a rear 3x2. That was the first time that we saw the prices start to change. You say that, as agents, it doesn't make a difference, but it does make a difference when you have faith in a suburb, that when you encourage buyers, developers to come into an area and it starts to change and the prices change. Of course, the market going up, the lack of listings does have an effect, but when you have agents who are working day in, day out, seeing the benefits of a suburb, you can just start to see it change.
These two suburbs, I think, are the perfect shining light to have that conversation about that real transition in prices we've seen. Obviously, you're across both of these. There's a correlation. Great agent, but you're not the only agent selling in these suburbs, right? So
that's right.
Do you think these suburbs have had their run? Do you think they can go much further in there for the time? I mean, they've outperformed nearly every other suburb in Perth. We expect Perth to continue to have growth, but not every suburb grows homogeneously. There'll be 1 year where, for example, Armidale suburbs made 30% last year across the board. You see suburbs in the western suburbs that have essentially been flatlining based on affordability for that demographic. Are you seeing the same pressure rolling on at the moment in these suburbs?
I can't see it changing in terms of negatively. These suburbs, they're exciting to the developer. They're exciting to families. You've got the support, particularly in Willagee, of the local high school and primary school. I can't see it changing. I've also sold a family home late last year in December, and it's going to be a record sale price for the area.
Yeah,
and that's not brand new.
You're not going to tell us the price of that on air,
No.
but it is absolutely in Willagee.
Watch this space.
Smashing records that most people would look at, for example, Winthrop and Melville, and be eyebrow raising. For Willagee, it really is quite nuts what that price is going to be.
Put us on the map again.
Well,
and
I think it's already on the
job.
map. When you think about buyer profile, obviously not every property, and to be frank, not many properties at the moment, given how lucrative it has been for people, is a development block. Most of them are not development blocks. They are the product of a development or a renovation or just simply a standard fully attached home. What's your buyer pool looking like at the moment? If you give me a couple of profiles.
So in terms of Willagee owner-occupiers, I would say 60% inquiry comes from families, 25% would come from Perth investors, and a good 15% would come from over east at the moment.
Well,
I've seen a big difference even over the last 8 to 10 weeks.
When you think about the profile there, it's not a great sign to see a suburb have a significant amount of investment percentage, especially from the East Coast, because we understand it is a herd that it rolls around chasing the greenest grass, and the second it's not green anymore, the sales signs go up, and that's not great for a suburb. There are other areas, for example, Shane Beaumont has told us in the past about Gosnells. He'll be on in a couple of weeks again to give us an update. His inquiry has been 50% or more from East Coast investors for the last 3 years.
Doesn't surprise me.
That reflects the area of Gosnells compared to the buyer pool, for example. But to suggest that we're only talking maybe 15% shows there really is quite a foundation of that local owner-occupier, which is probably a big reason why we're seeing this continual support of property prices.
Absolutely.
Last question, land. Since build costs have gone up by 60% in the last 3 years, it's obvious that most people have shied away from taking their build on, essentially, since all the conversations about building companies going broke have come to the fore. And of course, that's a logical thing to do. However, we've started to see over the last 6 months, I'd say, people start to come back into the building game simply because they're losing faith in their ability to actually just buy an established property. And also, as a perfect example here in Willagee, that the established price has got to a point where it actually makes sense to have a look at building just from a financial point of view if you can grab a piece of land. Now, it's certainly not got to a point where it's the flavour of the month where everyone's deciding I'm going to build now, I'm not going to buy established. But how is it looking in Willagee? If it's a trailblazer in the median house price space where that shift has happened so quickly, I'd expect there to be some pressure of people accepting at least buying some vacant land. Am I wrong?
What's interesting about that, Trent, is we're getting a lot of inquiry on land available. I feel that the frustration of not being able to find an established home, you're right, they're just looking at an alternative to actually get into the market. So building is now something that buyers are considering, especially in Willagee.
Was that a case a year ago? Could
No.
you move land a year ago?
Yes, but it was harder. So the last 3 blocks of land, I have multiple offers, which didn't happen even during the time where the government gave an incentive to build.
And are you seeing price growth?
So a good example of recent sales in land. Previously, I'd sold a 6-unit development. One of my buyers came back, wanted to resell his land. We sold it in November 22 for $380,000. It was a green title street front home. 10 months later, I sold the block right next door for $425,000 with multiple offers.
So that really starts to show the dynamic is starting to shift. Late last year, we had multiple offers for a street fronting green title block in Arkwell Street, one of the busiest streets in Willagee, for someone to go spend some money and build a pretty substantial home, I would have thought. So this home will be worth 7 figures when it's done.
And the other sale I had was down on Denian Street due to the fact that a few of the developments had sold and achieved record sale prices the year before. So a buyer was encouraged to spend $425,000 on a rear block of land in a dress circle location of Willagee.
Yeah, so we're talking $1,000 a square metre essentially, whereas a couple of years earlier you had a property with a house on it selling for essentially the same price. Things have really moved in Willagee.
They have.
Siobhan, I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming in. Please keep giving us updates. For everyone else listening, an update on the market right now. 3,700 properties on the market right now. It is an absolute barnstorm. When you think about supply, only a couple of weeks ago we were talking about there being 4,700 properties on the market, just breaking through 5,000. A year ago it was 7,000. So we have half the amount of properties on the market
49%.
as a year ago.
That's right.
Unbelievable.
Crazy. Never seen it like this before in my time of real estate.
The data shows that no one in real estate has ever seen the demand-supply dynamics be so tight in recorded history. So, Siobhan, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll speak to you again with an update soon.
Thanks, Trent. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!